Hey, this is Huck. Subscribe to Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be NonY, aka Tyler, depending on whether you remember the StarCraft 2 days. So NonY, obviously on this one, you're not a player who has like some Tom Brady-esque collection of rings and MVPs, so obviously we're not going to go super in-depth on loads of tournaments. But I thought an interesting angle is, if people are from Brood War / the old school days of StarCraft, they will know you're one of the people who not only was competing in the really old school days, when people kind of did play on passion, etc., it wasn't about big money, but also you then got at the time quite a unique perspective because you did go to Korea, a la IdrA, etc., and you had that brief period where you kind of got to experience a bit of that life too, which I must say, if anyone was an old school Western fan, that was sort of like the dream, like that whole thing people used to sell of like, it's the Mecca, that really was, if you're a StarCraft fan, that's not some hype even, it was real, right?
Yes, yeah. I'd love to share some tidbits if I can, but yeah.
Right, so one thing I would ask initially in your case is, in terms of if people remember, obviously I'm talking a very limited crowd here, the old school fans of Western StarCraft, it's not like you were there at the very, very beginning. You were like the first World Cyber Games, etc. But when I was looking up, you would have been about like, what, your late teens then? When was the time when you transitioned from just a player who's just a general gamer to someone who takes StarCraft more seriously, like tries to get really good? When was that, do you think?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, I was a very good RTS player before StarCraft. Like, I topped the ladder on some games like Red Alert.
Oh, right. Okay.
But when I switched, that's very, low skill. I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as competitive, but I at least had that going before StarCraft. And then with StarCraft was so much more difficult. I wasn't one of the top players instantly with that. And I didn't really have any aspiration to be. So I did play for several years before I was very good. And I was probably age about 17 or 18 before I got more competitive.
Are you someone, because obviously I think people might have an idea towards the end of your career, but are you someone in the early days, was there ever a time when you really did just play all day? Later on, people know you were more someone who dipped in and out, or you played to a degree. Were you a grinder at any point in StarCraft?
Not all day, not like that. I would have if I could have, but I'd say that just wasn't in my skill set to have that kind of stamina to play all day. And so I really believed in getting a high quality 4 to 6 hours of practice, do a lot of replay review and studying, watch all the pro gamer games, especially with the skill level between the pros, the Korean pros and the non-Korean pros was so high that it just seemed less efficient for me to try to figure stuff out myself, when it was like, well, there's a lot of very good stuff to copy here. So a lot of study.
Does that mean even in the days before you went to Korea, you would sometimes watch like the OSL or the MSL or Pro League? Do you actually watch it to like take things yourself, you're saying, to your game?
Yeah, we got the VODs, right? You could watch the video, and whatever the observer was showing you, that's all the information you could have. You didn't have the replays, right? Sure. And so I would study it and very slowly and try to recreate their build orders. So whatever little glimpse of, this Protoss player had this many units at this time, this far into the game time. It's like, okay, I need to do this in single player until I have that exact same thing. And I tried to reverse engineer their exact build orders to be on the same page as them.
That's interesting. You say you studied it a lot, because one thing I was going to ask you was, I got the sense from old interviews and when I would hear you talk back in the day, whereas the IdrAs of the world were the grinders who would just put in infinite hours, I always got the sense you were more of a field player, like kind of you play a bit of intuition. Is that not the case?
I wouldn't classify myself that way. I think my big thing was that the more you prepared, the more that you already knew going into a game, that's when you were freed up to improvise, right? And if you were overwhelmed just with getting to the next step in the game, then you're stuck. You're not going to do anything brilliant in the middle of the game. So I think I did have some nice improvisations during some of my matches, but that's definitely built on a foundation of like a huge decision tree that I'm following. And then I decide, it would be a good idea to do this.
Right. This is a question that will be very sort of telling of who I am when I ask the question. Because NonY, I actually love Protoss. It was my favorite always. So you'd think, well, I would ask this question. But if I'm thinking of the time period when you got to the top, you basically got good when Protoss was fucking shit before all the BSU stuff. Like, that's actually the word. Essentially, the question is, why play Protoss? It's kind of like sledding uphill, right? It's hard back then in the early days of Protoss.
Sure, yeah. I picked Protoss before I was competitive, right? Then, so it's a matter of, once you start getting competitive and you start competing, do you say, should I change or should I just stick with what I've got? And so I never felt like starting all over with a new race. Okay. Simple as that, yeah.
Because would you agree? I always thought, until things like some of the revolutions that happened within the game, I always thought, like, if you were Protoss, I felt like it was the hardest to play, because even though to someone at a low level they think it's just cheesy or whatever, you can't only do that. And for me, I've always described Protoss to me as like trying to walk like a tightrope. It's like, look, if you do it perfectly, it looks awesome. If you put 1 foot wrong, you fuck up the build order, you're just done at that point, right?
Sure, yeah, I think I would look at it more like just going by matchup, and I'd say Protoss versus Protoss was always kind of risky, kind of more rock, paper, scissors, and so it's like, how do you become a dominant, consistent winner in this matchup that's rock, paper, scissors? So that's difficult to master. And then I would say Protoss has always been kind of favored against Thorin, but that was personally my weakest matchup, so that was like, what am I doing here? And then Zerg. We were bad against Zerg until Bisu had his revolution in 2007, but Bisu was perhaps the most mechanically gifted player of the time. So it's like, all right, so we've got a blueprint to copy now. Who in the world
who can do it exactly?
Nobody. So what's doesn't help us? Yeah.
Yes. Thing is, though, there were some like actual like build concepts that people took from Bisu and like the
I mean, we did stuff. Copy. Sure, but it was still extremely mechanically difficult, and it wasn't like, oh, here's the blueprint, and now there are another 10 pro gamer Protosses doing the same thing. He remained unique for a while.
Who was your favorite Korean Protoss? Was it Bisu? Was it someone else? Who was your favorite to watch?
It became Bisu, but before Bisu was Bisu, I followed for a little bit. I really liked NonY.
Oh, sure.
And then Bisu kind of dethroned him.
Yes.
In my mind.
Yeah.
At one point, yeah.
No, I can see why. I mean, if no one remembers, like, he was probably one of the most creative Protoss players, right? He had so many interesting approaches and different angles he would take. Yeah, sure. What about, one thing I want to ask is, before the era when you went to Korea, when you were just in North America, you're just playing, obviously at the time, what people might not know is, even though it was an esport, it wasn't big. It was all the other games like Counter-Strike and Quake, these were the big esports. Obviously, there would be the World Cyber Games early on, there was the odd tournament, and as far as I know, though, people were very active on the ladder, though, right? People did like play quite a lot still, though. Was there would you have said in your scene, was there a large community? Was there a decent amount of people to play? Was it the same group of people that played? What was it like?
It was a lot of the same people, and it was actually kind of seasonal, because, when the World Cyber Games came around, everyone's playing and wants to be ready, but we didn't have consistent tournaments year round. So it was kind of seasonal of when something popped up. And then unfortunately, the official Blizzard ladder was not what we played ever.
Right.
So, because it was so bad.
Oh, it was iccup and stuff, right? Oh yeah, sure. I'm mixing up with StarCraft 2, true, okay.
And there were periods when those third-party ladders, none of them was really up and running very well. And so I remember a few gaps when it was like, how do you even practice? You just play customs or whatever. Right. So, so there was the seasonality with the tournaments, and there was the inconsistency with a good ladder to practice. But overall, you saw the same faces come back time after time. You got to know people. It was very consistent, and honestly, not a lot of like new blood coming up. It felt like it was. Once in a while, a new person would appear, but for a long time, it was, from, you look at like 2004, 2005 to like 2010, and it's like you're seeing the same dudes just who play this as a passion, and they're talented, and everyone's coming around every time that the ladder heats up or there's a tournament.
No, I mean, as you say, the joke is when you could almost chart on the calendar when World Cyber Games qualify for USAs, and then like a month and a half before, they're all going to start playing in control. Everyone's going to cycle up, and then everyone's going to go to the ladder, but it's going to be like the same 8 people, It's just, let's see who wins this time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, as I referenced, I actually forgot about that. It's true. iccup, obviously, if people don't know, was like the way people often play, but that was like a way to organise games. Dude, bear in mind, this is the era before like proper matchmaking concepts in online games. I always thought that was actually a very good system if you were trying to be like semi-pro, because I always say to people, like, you couldn't really like fluke that, because the actual level of people you have to play against, it's just obvious if you're actually good enough, but it is hard. But I thought it was very satisfying. Like, you felt like you earned your rank on there, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was, as far as I know, like that was just kind of a, there was no weirdness with MMR like there is today. It was just it was more straightforward, win games and you go up, and lose games and you go down. And like, yeah, you had to fight for every rank. And there was a little bit of inconsistency of like, some people played when the Koreans were playing, and I'd say overall the Koreans were better. So if you played mostly Koreans, your rank might be a little bit lower, and then season to season, maybe a little inconsistency. But overall, if you reached a certain rank, that really meant something. And as we were playing just for passion, that was really significant to us. It was pretty cool to have something like that.
Before you went to Korea, did you have times through iccup or whatever? Did you actually have times where you were getting to play against like actual Korean pros, like I don't know, low-level people in the houses or something? Did you ever play against people who were real pros, do you think?
Low-level people in the house, yeah. As far as actual like A-tier pro gamers, very rarely. There were some other players that I think had more connections like that. Like Testy, I think, got to play versus more pros. Mondragon might have gotten to do it a little bit more.
Maybe have the connection from World Cyber Games and stuff like that, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I don't know exactly everyone, but for me, not as much. It would just be, how high of a rank could I get on PG Tour, and who would play me on PG Tour. And yeah, like for people who don't know, it wasn't matchmaking. It was, you go into a channel and you say, I'm this rank and I'm looking for a game. And someone says, I'm this rank too. Do you want to play? And you're like, yeah. So like, they could have declined playing against foreigners. So it was actually cool. You could get games against Koreans.
Yeah. By the way, one thing I want to stress is you yourself said that, like, obviously the top Korean pros in Brood War, especially, there was a massive skill gap. And you could even see with your eyes, the eye test checked out that they were insanely good. But what I ask is this, I want to set it up politely. Obviously, at one point, you were one of the best Western players. Like, of a non-Korean, you were one of the best. You proved it in results. So give me a sense to let people understand, before you go to Korea, if you even meet one of these like low-level players in the pro gaming house, I'm guessing they're pretty good. I'm guessing they beat you most of the time, right? The gap was pretty big, right?
Yeah, so I think my estimate of how many pro gamers there were when I moved to Korea was maybe around 300 when you're including all the B tier guys. Right. So every team had an A tier and a B tier, and the B tier is kind of like a development team. And I was solidly in, I would say I was like an average B team player.
Right.
So, I was maybe like top 200. If I'm being optimistic. So yeah, I mean, there you go. Like, I'm arguably the number one, or, at worst number two. I think the only other person at the time you could say is IdrA, non-Korean in the world. And so that was like good for top 200 in Korea.
Before the opportunity came along to go to Korea, and if people don't know, that even that's been sold almost as like it was an easy idea. Like, as far as I know, everyone had to have connections, like you're referring to earlier. Like, as far as I know, people like IdrA got in through people knowing the right manager guy, and then he was like, oh, okay. It wasn't like now where you could just, there was no social media. You couldn't just message someone like, hey, can I come over? Obviously, it's hard. They're in their own little world over in Korea. So before you ever went there, maybe, I don't know, maybe you didn't even know if it was possible to play Korean. But did you ever have dreams of like, what if I could be a top pro? What if I could go to, was this something you actually had as an idealized dream or something?
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of us who that was the big dream, that you didn't really have any bigger dream than that. Was like, I've kind of reached the level that I can reach without being in one of these pro houses. And so if I want to get any better, it's get into one of these pro houses. And so it's like, that would be step number one. And then step number two is, survive the pro house and see if you actually get better, or if you hit a wall.
If people don't know, even when IdrA went and like people were sort of getting a little bit of an insight as to what it was like as far as I know, his life was very fucking hard there. Like, if you remember, people used to even be rude to him and be like, he's cleaning the toilets, because that was a real thing. Like, if you start, I always described it like, it sounded like joining a pro team there. It was almost like joining a fraternity. Like, when you're the beginner, they haze the fuck out of you. You have to do all the shit stuff. There's a hierarchy. You have to work you up, right? If I hear that stuff, though, here's the only thing. That's really intimidating, actually. Like, no, it sounds great to go and practice and be awesome at the game, but that sounds really harsh. Like, obviously, I know in your case, you didn't stay very long, but when you initially went there, were you actually in for the idea that if this goes well, like IdrA, I'll just stay here and grind? I'll be a B teamer and work my way and try and get the practice. Were you in for that idea?
Yeah. I mean, I had planned to stay for longer. and the life didn't end up suiting me.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, I can go into a little bit
give
of
me a
detail
sense.
on that. So first of all, there was a sense, and this, I would say this part of it I could have definitely gotten over, but there was a sense of, I'm here to be as good as I can be at StarCraft. That's why I came here, and that's what you want from me, right? And so I'm wondering, why am I doing chores and stuff? Like, can you not hire like a minimum wage maid for us? Like, why? Because because we had very long practice hours,
Sure.
And so with my very little free time, it was like, okay, now you're gonna like literally clean the toilet. It's not a joke. You're cleaning the toilet, and and then so there was that, and then I also had serious conversations with them of like, I've been an athlete my whole life, and getting regular exercise is part of my well-being. I need this. If you want me to be the best player I can be, I needed some regular exercise, and there's no time in my schedule for that either.
Oh, they just wanted you to grind all day, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so there was that component there of like, I wasn't expecting to be pampered and have everything I needed like given to me or whatever, but it was the opposite of that. It was like, these things are drains on my ability to reach my potential in StarCraft. I don't understand why it's like that. So there was that, but then, ultimately, like I said earlier, in this interview, I was more of a 4 to 6 hour a day player. And so this idea that everybody has to play 10 to 11 to 12 hours a day, and some people are doing more than that by choice, was crazy to me. And it was like, I thought it wasn't that I thought I was going to be a complete exception to that, but I thought there would be like a little bit of wiggle room or whatever, but it was very pretty strict. And so that was hard for me to get used to.
By the way, as you say there, the thing I think people always misunderstand is this, story is back then the coach might mandate you play 10 to 12. So already the Western pro gamers even like, fucking hell. But no, the best players, like if you're like the ace player or like a guy who plays, so they just play like 4 hours extra themselves. Like essentially they just live in the game almost, right?
Yeah, it's insane. And it was, my pet theory was almost like, I know for a fact, I'll just say this for a fact. There's no way that that's getting every single individual to reach their potential.
Oh, surely not. Surely it burns people out, right?
Yeah, so my pet theory was just like, okay, the current best players are not actually the best players in the world. They're the ones that survived the system, or that the system is suited to them. And we don't actually know what talent there was lurking in these pro houses that were just burnt out.
True.
Including me.
Yeah. Maybe. It's valid, right? What about when you first went there? If people don't know, there was also a very interesting system back then where a lot of people don't know this to this day. Back then, it's not like Western esports. You don't just sign up like, hey, I qualified to IEM, so you're in Germany or whatever. Like, you had to actually have a license to be a pro gamer back then, guys. And famously, they had a really cool meritocracy where if you entered this tournament called Courage, it was an amateur tournament, and you won it, you automatically got the license, and you could be on you could be on whatever pro team accepted you with the license, right? So famously, if people don't know, even fuckers like Flash and J-Dog played in this tournament to get into the pro scene. It's like, it wasn't just nobody. So if people don't know, when you went to this tournament, a lot of Westerns tried going to this. I know people in our team used to play it for fun and then just get knocked out like the first 2 rounds. Because, why not? Why not live the dream? But in your case, if people remember the old video Artosis film, it was almost like a documentary, mate, because you actually made the run. You were 1 game from winning the license, right?
That's
right. Be a buzz, right?
I lost it 1-2 in the best of 3 in the finals. And the last game was a long, intense game.
If you'd won that, I mean, even the idea you have a chance to win it sounds wild. That seems like the dream already. What was your vibe when you were on this run?
Yeah, it felt very good. There was definitely a component of has this Korean team invited this foreigner just for like promotional reasons? Like obviously I'm pretty, but did I actually earn my spot on this team? And so, to put this into the context, the whole B team, the B team they're not licensed pro gamers, right? They're basically competing to become a licensed pro gamer. And each team can have, I believe they had 2 licenses
I think so,
to hand out per year. And so they could basically choose 2 B teamers, or if you want to be a good boy and save them the trouble, then you can qualify through this tournament. And so the plan was,
like, as far as I know, I think IdrA did get given one, right? He didn't win the car. I think he got given his license,
I think he got given one, yeah. Right. And so the plan was I was going to get one probably even if I hadn't totally earned it at the end of the year. But then, of course, I'm going to play Courage to see if I can get one for free. And so nobody was really expecting me to do this well. And honestly, I think that would have been a very consistent result because I have very conservative, consistent style of play.
Right.
And a lot of people were just doing crazy things against me, and I just knew how to counter all of it and survive and survive and survive. And then the guy that I played in the finals was also a very conservative, high skill player too. And he just outplayed me in the best three. There's nothing more I can say about that. But I felt like it proved that I deserved to be there, and it was a very good result, even though I didn't get the win.
Like I say, this sounds like actually every Western StarCraft player's dream. Like the analogy for you would be this, NonY. You remember in the first Karate Kid film, obviously he spends the whole movie doing all this, but like, he's not even doing karate, if you remember, so he's getting tricked in all those techniques. And then he goes to that tournament and you're like, is this even real? Does and obviously he's winning all fights. You're like, boss, oh my God, this is so... Dude, it sounds like you were living the dream. Like you actually were beating all these fucking Korean players, you winning the game. Did it feel surreal?
It did feel surreal, yeah. I on it, and like that tournament is a minefield. I can't explain to everyone what StarCraft is like exactly, but it's a lot of people all inning and doing crazy.
Right. Okay.
You can play like a pro gamer, like a lower skill player can play like a pro gamer toward a limited amount, I guess I would say.
Right.
And the more of an all-in rush game plan that you're doing, the closer you get to emulating a very high skill player. And so these people practice these all-ins, they execute them very well, and the whole thing's a minefield. And I think a lot of pro gamers would struggle to survive all the things.
Oh, the mental alone would be hard, right? A lot of them, I think, get cracked just from that. Yeah, sure.
It felt, I did feel very good about surviving all those games. And it did feel very validating. And it was surreal that I was like actually pulling it off and nobody was successful against me until the end.
As you say, if you'd have just gone there and they'd have been like, hey, we've got a white guy from the West is coming in who's going to be good, and they give him the license, everyone would have just thought, like, it's like privilege, isn't it? It's like, he's not really that good. After this tournament, did people give you your respect? Did you feel like the Koreans sort of, hey, he's got some game? Did he get the nod, do you think?
Oh yeah, my teammates were very impressed. I think there was definitely more respect there after that, especially because I was really struggling with performance every single day in the team house in practice.
Right.
And so I had a little bit of extra rest before this tournament, and then this isn't something I could do every day, but for the tournament, I just ton of caffeine. Okay. I was just so tired all the time, right? But it's like you can't, if you start having a ton of caffeine every day as your routine, that's going to make it worse. So I was like, all right, well, I can calf up for this tournament. And so I think that helped get rid of the fatigue. I think I played at a higher level than I had been playing at the team house on average. And so people saw that like, they saw what I could do, I guess I could say, when they hadn't seen it as much before.
By the way, another thing people might not be aware about is when you're in a team house and there's this hierarchy I described, where you have like the practice partners who sometimes don't even live there, the B teamers, as you say, are the people who aspire to be A team and pro, and obviously the A team are the people you've seen in Pro League and on TV and all that jazz. I think another thing people might not know, NonY, is as far as I know, the way it was even set up was like a hierarchy. Like it's almost like a dojo in a kung fu movie. Like when you go there, they're not just giving you practice against like the ace all the time. In fact, you won't never play them at the beginning. You play yourself against a low level guy, and it's almost like an audition. Right? You have to sort of like do well enough that they give you the better practice. Because I've heard some of those coaches were brutal. Like if they thought you were like a waste of time, they'd just like give you the shit matches and never give you the best practice. Was it like this?
Yeah, or they'd tell you to play PG Tour.
Right. Okay.
Get up to A rank, get your rank back up to A on PG Tour, and then you can play with the A team again. I was told to play on PG Tour at one point, and then it's also that you are you help the pro gamers prepare for their matches.
Oh, you have to. So it's a bit like MMA, right? You have to mimic their opponent or something like that, right?
Yeah. So you're not spending all your time on improving yourself.
Yes.
So I remember, but it was a very proud moment too. I remember I had a teammate that had a pro league match coming up, and so we were preparing him for a PvP. And it was him and a few other of the B teamers, and we were everyone was either observing or playing. So we were like on a rotation playing against him. And if you weren't playing against him, you were observing. And we were all just like trying to refine the strat. And I contributed to it in a significant way, not in an insignificant way. And then he won the match. And he thanked me. So that was really cool. Because that's something that programmers would do back then, is in their post-game interviews, they would give credit to their practice partners. And so I was like, that was me. I was like, I was the practice partner.
That's baller, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What about, I saw back in the day, and if people know the time period, remember we're talking about like 2008, early 2009 here. I saw you actually got to play a real match against JulyZerg. If people don't know, he won the fucking OSL in 2008. He was still like a top player. Like, this is pretty cool. You got to play against him.
Yeah.
What was that like?
He was a lot better than me.
Right.
At that time, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely thrilling every time you get to take a shot. Even if you know you're the underdog, you get to try your stuff. And even if you don't win, you can see in certain parts of the game that certain things worked, or you kept up with him in certain ways. And so it was productive and it was exciting.
I would actually say I'd like your take on this. One thing I always thought, I wasn't a big fan of StarCraft 2, mate. I'm a bit of like an old school elitist. And one of the reasons why actually was I always thought I can see why StarCraft 2 appealed to the wider audience, because it was a much quicker format. Like everyone got the 200 supply army like 8 minutes in, death ball fight, and then the game's pretty much over. Like actually, if you want like a quick esports game, that's great. Why I always thought, to me, Broodmore is more like chess or something. It's like you got the slow build up, you got the expansions of the bases. You never normally end the game in one fight. You know, it's a bunch of battles back and forth, and you have chances to adapt and stuff. So as you're saying, one of the things I always thought must be great about it is, even if you lose, as you say, you can have a sense of like, I didn't lose by that much though. Like I was in like the mid game, or, you know, I correctly responded to this. You can kind of get a sense even in a loss of where you are on the, where you're progressing or something, right?
Yeah, I think you're correct in that StarCraft 2 definitely suffered in that way, specifically. And there was a lot more, it felt like there were a lot more components to a Brood War game than there were to a StarCraft 2 game on average over the life of StarCraft 2's whole life. I think it's gotten better over the years, especially by the time the last expansion came out.
Sure.
They did a few more patches. I think it got better and better. But yeah, for the first 5 years at least of StarCraft 2's life, it was definitely paled in comparison in a lot of ways like that. And so Brood War just it had a lot more potential for like meaningful, to feel meaningful, I guess.
Dude, one thing
other than just the win or the loss.
Sure. One thing that cracked me up is when I was doing a little bit of research to double check some things before this interview, I found the post where it announces that you're coming back from Korea and you're not going to stay and be in the team house. And dude, this post's in like 2009 or something, but in the post, it sounds like you're just like retiring from esports. Like you're sort of like, I won't be playing StarCraft as much, and it wasn't really for me, and I'm just going to go back now. Like, but this decision wasn't a small one, right? If you go back, you sort of giving up the dream. Like this was the chance to do it, right? When you were there.
Yeah, and I can't remember how much we knew about StarCraft 2 at that point. I think it had to have been announced by then. But I couldn't have been thinking about that.
No one knew if it'd be a big esport, though, right? No one knew if it'd be like Korea, maybe it'd be in Korea again. Maybe there wouldn't be Western esports, right?
Yeah, so I really was just putting an end to my Brood War career, which then they announced another TSL. They announced the TSL 2, which then I did practice up for and come back and win. And so that was nice. And then StarCraft 2 came out. So then that was the end of it. But yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like, well, like I was saying earlier, the going to Korea and joining one of these houses, that was the big goal. And then, so if you decide to regress from that, it's like you could, assuming StarCraft 2 wasn't coming out and it was just going to go back to the way it was, I could go back to being a yearly WCG player. I guess I could have done that, but I was going back to school, and so I was like, I think it's probably over now. I think I'm going to graduate school and just get a traditional job.
Right, I'm asking a little bit out of order here because the year you had the run at the World Time Games was actually just before you went to Korea. So I'm sort of a bit out of chronological order here. But I want to ask about this. So obviously, just at the outset, in the West, if you weren't able to go to Korea, just to qualify to that tournament was an accomplishment in itself, right? Everyone who was going ham, like you say, the same group of people, all but I'm sure just to qualify for the first time was a big deal, right?
Yeah, I mean, the United States was pretty competitive. So, we had some talented players, and IdrA was in the mix, and we had other talented players over the years, and so it was never easy. Some countries, I think, it was more like there was a heavy favorite for some countries. So like, you know, they weren't really tested on the national stage, and so then they just kind of went to the finals. But there were several countries that were very competitive, and so just the national tournament before the international tournament was a huge test, and to actually get through to the international was definitely a big accomplishment.
I feel like if someone pulls up the World Cyber Games bracket for that 2008 year when you went, it ties into what you said earlier about the notorious PvP matchup, probably the ultimate coin flip matchup in eSport. Bro, you had to play a Chinese Protoss and he beat you. If you'd have beaten that, you would have got to play Stork. Dude, that would have been the shit. I bet you were so hyped it was such a bummer, right? Come on, you were that close. You were one game, right?
Yeah, and I specifically remember that match. It hurt really bad because I was already planning to go to Korea at that point.
Oh, right.
People knew I was going to Korea. And so it was like, oh, here's the guy who's going to be going to Korea. He's supposed to be the best and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, we didn't play Chinese players as much. It was kind of weird, you know, like they were, I don't know, like they seemed a little more insular or something, but like, we played them once in a while, but it just sometimes a really good Chinese player kind of developed without playing a bunch of the rest of the world very much. Anyway, this Protoss player played an opening that I just barely had. I didn't really have any practice against, and I thought I knew the solution to it, but I don't think I had played against a high skill player who played this opening before, and so that sometimes that can be all the difference. You think you are comfortable and know how to counter a certain thing, but it turns out you were only practicing against lower skill people. This guy played this thing, and it was really frustrating to me. I was like, you know, I think overall I could have beat this guy. If we played 100 times, you know, I would get used to his opener, and then I would start beating him more than he beat me. But I don't know. Maybe he was very talented too, but that was disappointing for sure.
By the way, one last thing I forgot to ask about the Korea thing, which is fucking hilarious, is I also looked up, and I remember, the funny, your coach and your team, eSTRO, did the same thing. I know that the guy from fucking CJ did to IdrA. They both did these interviews where it's so Korean. On the one hand, they start out like backhanded compliment. They give you like compliment, hey, this player is talented. And then if you don't know, guys, they just like some insane Tiger Mom shit. They mega shit on you. Like this guy made it, both of them I remember, like, because they're so like, perfectionist, aren't they? Like, dude, they made you sound like you suck. Like the way they were describing all the things you need to improve. Like it's almost like like they made it sound like you have to improve everything, which I get. Look, all compared to like the best player in the world, you know. Like, but that's kind of shows the difference in mentality, right? In the West, we're all like, he's one of the best. You're that close. What was that like? Because that must be that's tricky to deal with someone who has high expectations, right?
Yeah, I think part of it too was that obviously they're very successful. They were way better than the rest of the world, so there was a good reason to think that the way that they thought about the game, the way they practiced the game, all their kind of policies of how you play the game and how you think about the game should be superior, right? And so it was like they wanted for me to join their system, but at the same time I was like, what if I have some valuable contributions to make too? Like, what do you want me to just be another like drone, like a copy?
What was the answer? Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
okay.
There were some things that I showed them that I thought I showed them some different things, and I think they were open to it. And if I would have kept improving and getting better, they would have been like, oh, you know, maybe this is something.
Right.
But the hierarchical nature. That's a long word. Pretend I pronounced it correctly.
Yeah, hierarchical. It's all good.
Hierarchical nature of the situation was, you know, I needed to have been there longer and to have accomplished more things, I think, before things like that were heard out. And so I think I could have gotten there eventually and had more of an influence. But I think a lot of that was just them being like, you know, oh, this guy doesn't know about all this, and he doesn't do things this way. We got to get him up to speed on all this. And it was like I was kind of aware of that stuff, but skeptical if it was actually optimal.
One thing I wanted to ask was, I always thought a really misunderstood thing, because I know in StarCraft 2, no one ever talked about this, is as far as I know, NonY, famously, the thing about StarCraft is it's not like games like FPS games. You actually can play with like 90, 100 ping. It's doable. Like, it's not perfect, but the idea is you can play the game. And I was told by people who lived in Korea, if you actually live on the west coast of North America, you actually can practice Koreans. It's reasonable ping. Like, it won't be like a waste of time to play the game. Is it true? Could you actually like play on the ladder or not the ladder, fuck that. Could you play iccup and stuff for Koreans and it wouldn't be too bad on the ping if you were in America?
I didn't think it was that bad at all.
Right.
And especially, I think what's really hard is switching between very low ping and high ping if you're in a situation like that. And so I could definitely sympathize with Koreans who are used to playing other Koreans on very low ping or even playing on LAN, because they could play on LAN too a lot. And then, so it might have felt worse to them, but for us, you could get used to it. But it was weird too for like World Cyber Games because, we played on LAN when we had the opportunity to. And that was just, it was weird how amazing that felt.
Because you just used a permanent lag, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, when you actually were back in the US, did you have like specific practice partners once you were famous? You were playing against? Did you play against the IdrAs of the world or Control or Hard Horses? Did you just play general people? What was your practice approach?
So I was friends with those guys and sometimes did some kind of practice partner sessions, but I was vast majority, I played ladders and I studied VODs and replays. So not a lot of grinding it out with one guy in customs.
By the way, you referenced it earlier in the episode, but I would ask to expand on the concept you just said there. I do think an underrated aspect of esports is I do think people think of practice as you just grind playing the game itself. But I actually think theory practice, what you're talking about, so essentially what sports stars do, like every wide receiver in the NFL has all the clips of how the defense is going to play him and what his route. That could be actually, I'd just say, maybe it takes more of a cerebral approach to just mass playing the game, but there's clearly a lot can be gleaned just from studying, right?
Yeah, studying and to the extent, I think one thing that's really underdeveloped and I haven't kept up with, esports has gotten so crazy in how like professional it is now, right? And I have not been in any of those rooms with the League of Legends teams or the Counter-Strike teams or the Dota teams that have, they have like a coach, but then they have also several other staff and all this stuff. And it's like, so I don't know what it's like, but I would say from my perspective, I always thought that what was underappreciated or underdeveloped was like drills. Because, there's study and then there's playing the actual game, like a full real game. But then, what you look at musicians trying to master an instrument, you look at athletes trying to master their sport. And a lot of times they're doing drills that have some kind of, and I understand that, shooters will do aim training. And so, I think that's a good example, but I think, take that concept and then try to apply it to literally everything. Try to apply it to everything you can in RTS and League or whatever. And you should have, because a lot of it's the mental training, right? So aim training is more just like, you're training your hand.
Yes.
So I not that I did a lot of drills, but I tried to do a few, and it was, I thought it was definitely helpful. And so it would be sick if someone could develop that more.
By the way, as referenced, when you played in the TSL, famously you played against IdrA, and it's funny because this is actually before StarCraft 2, but he was always IdrA. If people don't know, the story was the same with that guy the whole time. He would always be really good, and he knew he was really good, but then in the game, he'd always find a way to lose a game he thought he should win, and then semi-rage quit / be like, insult you for beating him in the way he shouldn't win or whatever. Like, if people remember this match, like, what would you say about it?
Well, we both, I was surprised that he respected my skill level to the extent that he did, because I hadn't played for a long time, and then I came back to try to get in shape real quick. And I think he played a little bit riskier than he normally plays. And so I thought that was interesting that he didn't think he could just play really conservatively and still beat me. But he, if you get to a certain level of skill, IdrA respects you, actually.
Right.
And so, if Flash played him and beat him 10-0, and like 4 of those were cheeses,
He's not going to complain.
He's going to be like, I mean, he gets it. And so they're like kind of going back when I said, that in the Courage tournament, a lot of those players are doing these all-ins. That's exactly the kind of thing that IdrA didn't respect. He could recognize the fact that a player with limited talent knew their limitations and knew that the best that they could be, that their ceiling was doing one of these all-in rushes, cheesy rushes. And he hated whenever someone like that ever beat him. And so I think that was his issue. And I think I had risen above that. And if I did a risky play, he would recognize that for the strategy it is. Those things are more of strategies for best of fives and best of sevens, where you're going to throw that in on a certain map, and it really throws off your opponent's preparation in mind games and stuff like that.
Dude, one thing I think is quite cool when you look back is obviously so many of these names from StarCraft became used, like people like Tasteless, for example. But I always, what's fun about memories is when you remember, you sort of get that feeling as if you're back there. And I can remember when this guy, because he was the first one aside from IdrA, like when he went to Korea and started doing all that GOM shit. Dude, at the time, I never thought I'm going to go to Korea or do anything like that side of esports. Dude, it was almost like I was like living vicariously through all the news from him. Like, this is sick, holy shit. Like, he's on the TV now. Oh my God, there's like flash. It was actually kind of dope. Like, just the vibe was sick, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so impressed by what Tasteless and Tasteless did moving out there and kind of paving the way. And after me, before me, like IdrA, like they helped other people get out there. It would have been so hard for me to just do that without them being there and like having that support. And then even after I left, they continue to do it for so many people after me, a lot with StarCraft too. Amazing, like courageous of them to do that, and just like really cool the success they achieved.
Right, I'm going to phrase this question politely, but it's not like I hope you're not like trying to work for the CIA, so I don't think it'll be a problem as a question. There's a famous clip of you where you were playing with the unit, the Arbiter, in the fucking Protoss, where essentially I can infer from this, NonY, maybe NonY like to occasionally smoke a little bit and play. That's the inference I'm taking. Like, listen, it's not like no one ever did it. By the way, a spoiler, I can tell you right now, NonY, you know when people do that question, like, is it an enhancer or an inhibitor to smoke weed while playing? I always told people like this, it depends if you do it regularly. Like, put it this way, I can tell you some fucking unbelievable Counter-Strike and Quake players, mate, who, the joke is someone probably need to do that to play, like they just do it all day anyway. So if you were late night, you sometimes do something like this and play a bit of StarCraft. It's stimulating, right? It's a fun thing to play while in Boston or whatever, right?
Yeah, I would really argue with someone who said that StarCraft is a game where you could play well while high, but and I knew some players who had an issue with that. I don't think they reached their potential because of that. But for me, no, that was not a habitual thing.
Okay, just wondered.
Yeah. Yeah.
By the way, as you say,
it's legal here now.
Yeah, true. Yeah, like I said, as long as there's no problem. By the way, this is ages ago as well. It's like we're talking about 17 years ago, something, guys. You didn't do it last week. So I would ask this question. As you said, you set it up perfectly. No one actually really knew what StarCraft 2 was going to be. Like, if you remember, it was one of those things where, BlizzCon, they'd show you like a teaser of like a shit unit or something that wasn't even finished. And at the time, the key thing was no one knew that Blizzard would be involved. We all thought maybe it'll just be like the normal esports scene. So again, Korea will have it. They'll have their leagues, we assumed. As you said, maybe there'd be World Cyber Games, or I don't know, ESL might do it, but no one knew Blizzard would come and build up all this stuff and make GSL and stuff, right? When StarCraft 2 was announced, do you remember when you decided, like, I'm actually going to try being pro in this game? Was there like a moment when it made sense to you, like, I can try being pro? Because as we said earlier on, you sort of had given up the pro life, right? Was there a moment you remember? Or something that convinced you?
I mean, how could I resist, like, trying to get good at StarCraft 2 when it first came out? Because it's not like there were a lot of good comparable RTSs coming out.
True, that's true.
I mean, I'm not the type of player who was trying like every little RTS that came out over the years. Some players have this like encyclopedic knowledge of all these RTSs. I'm like, Brood War was the only RTS.
Yeah,
what are you talking about? So there was no RTS like that. And to actually have one that it was like, oh, a lot of talented people are going to be competing in this and that kind of thing. It's like, even if I wasn't trying to go pro, it's like I would at least have to, in my spare time, be as competitive as possible. But then, that's actually when Liquid changed from being not a pro organization. We were just a clan, as we called them back then, it was just a clan, and then it became a pro team, and it was with the StarCraft 2 squad, and I was a part of that. I was, a founding member, so to say, of the Liquid pro team, and so I just rode that out, even though StarCraft 2 never really clicked for me, which I wouldn't blame that. I would more blame myself. I never was in a good. I never had like a good practice schedule and like had a good healthy practice schedule, I would say, in StarCraft 2.
Right.
And so, yeah.
Because in the early days, if people remember, when the first MLG circuit came along in 2010, before the Koreans came, you were mixing it up there. You had some good. You had like 6 players, the 4th. You were in and among the top players in the West, right?
Yeah, I wasn't bad. I had some high finishes, and but yeah, nowhere near my potential, and just just didn't work out.
Was there a specific moment that you realize it's not going to happen? Like were you thinking in this game, like, I'm going to grind and I'm going to put in the out, I'm going to go to Korea again with these thoughts?
No, it was. I mean, I just kind of kept doing it because I didn't have anything else I wanted to do, or it just kept. More accurately, I knew that my practice wasn't good. I knew that like my lifestyle wasn't good, and so I constantly felt like, oh, I'm gonna get it together, and I'm gonna it's gonna click again, and everything's gonna work. And so that just went on for years, I would say, where I was making some money, and that was okay, and but yeah, I constantly felt like I was gonna get it together and become better and reach my potential, and then it just kind of fizzled out. And then, the real end to it was that my first son was born in 2018. Right. So it's like, okay, it's been 8 years now since StarCraft 2 came out, and I have a son now, so that's probably the end of it there.
Obviously, an interesting detail was, even though in theory it's still just Protoss, like the races do play pretty differently in StarCraft 2 from Brood War, famously, right? Why stick with Protoss? Was there a reason? Just because you were a Protoss player? Were you interested in how they played in StarCraft 2?
Yeah, I mean, it had interesting mechanics from the get-go with the warp gates, the warp prism. It had what I thought was, I liked having a high value, smaller unit count type of unit composition. And so, it had some interesting things going for it. And then it had some of the units were returning, like it still had High Templars casting storms. It still had the Dark Templars, and it just felt familiar. And then there were also some things that I was excited about using.
Because I have to say, one thing I loved as a Protoss player was, if you played Brood War, especially because Brood War had one patch for 10 years, it was the same game the whole time. So if you are Protoss, it's a nightmare trying to beat all those guys. When StarCraft 2 came out and there would be those odd patches where Protoss was OP, I was like, yeah, you guys need to suffer now. That's right. Well, I've got Stalkers. I've got the fucking Warp Gate. Now I get a turn to be OP. That was kind of cool too, right? Yeah. Make all those Terrans suffer.
Yeah. My part of my problem too, competitively, was that I just didn't like doing what everyone else was doing.
Right.
And so that I had a long history of that with StarCraft 1. I tried to copy the Korean pro gamers in StarCraft 1. That's absolutely true. But I was not trying to do what my peers were doing, right? And so it's like I was always trying to figure out, the Koreans are better than me. I can't actually do what they're doing, but to what extent can I copy them a little bit and get some value out of that? So I liked doing something that my peers weren't doing. And then in StarCraft 2, especially with the birth of a new game, it's very hard to, a meta develops and everyone's like, this strat is strong. It's very hard to very quickly come up with your own unique solution to that's better, right? That's a very tall task and very unlikely, even for a very talented player to do. And so I would have been a lot better off just trying to not come up with anything original at all, taking all the strongest, most popular builds, and then just trying to play them better. But I mostly wasn't doing that, and didn't have the practice to back it up.
What did you think of some of the design elements that were different from Brood War? Like, I'll give you an example. Even though when you start playing Brood War, it's really annoying having to learn all the default hotkeys and do like all the build, make the unit go slightly faster to the mineral patch. Like, that seems annoying. But the thing is, though, when you get good at it, then when you come to StarCraft 2 and it's just all like multiple building selection and the probes just farm properly, I almost feel then cheated. Like, what the hell? Where's my warm up? Why am I clicking keys? You know, like I can just sort of autopilot it. Did you mind that? Were you fine with that?
Well, it was the part that I didn't like about it, just to make a real rough analogy, is like, for outdoor soccer or football, as non-Americans call it, you have large fields.
Yes.
But then there's also indoor soccer that are much smaller arenas, right?
Yeah.
So imagine you play normal outdoor soccer and you've been training at running your whole life to be a faster sprinter, to be able to be more active the whole match. And then it's like, oh, everyone's playing indoor now. So as much as you're a good runner and you've trained all this endurance and stuff, it matters a whole lot less now. I'm like, that's kind of what it felt like. I was like, these skills that were very difficult for me to develop, and a lot of people failed to develop them. I should deserve credit and have a competitive advantage for having developed them. They're just gone now. And so that was frustrating. And I had a few shocking moments, like in the first few weeks of StarCraft 2, of people who are much worse than me at StarCraft 1 actually taking games off me.
Oh, the worst feeling ever, right? Oh, the worst feeling ever.
Out macroing me. Out macroing me. I'm like, you are not allowed to out macro me. It shouldn't be possible. So there was a tough transition period for sure.
No, I get what you mean by that, by the way. It's like the IdrA point. Look, anyone can win a random, 6 pool or whatever. But yeah, if the idea they beat you in a real macro game, that's StarCraft. If they do that, they're better than you. I'm sorry, right? It sucks, but it's true, It's hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
What about, one thing I always thought was weird is, it's funny that everyone who thinks of Brood War and they think of people raging, they just think of Artosis because of his stream note, obviously, right? Yeah. But I'll tell you what, if you're a Protoss player, we're probably the biggest whiners of all time. One, obviously our race was weaker, but then also, when the other player on the other race loses to a Protoss, they only see the best of it, NonY. They see like, oh my God, the Reaver's OP. Oh, this is bullshit. And you want to tell them all our OP units, sometimes don't even work. Like that fucking Reaver bot doesn't even hit sometimes. It's a dod. Or the fucking Dragoon, I told him to just go across the bridge. I don't know why he's on this wall stuck like that, It's mad. It's really fucking frustrating just playing Protoss, never mind losing to it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. We have very powerful units. It's true. So then, or we have invisible units as well.
There's that as well. True.
That's frustrating.
True. I get that one. I'm with them on that one. The invisible one, that is bullshit. I can't lie. Yeah. Every Protoss, when you're in their base with the Dark Templar, you just it's like being a troll. You just love it how frustrating it is for them. Oh, yeah. What about, are you someone who, obviously they did the StarCraft Remastered. I know you were playing StarCraft 2 until the end, like you say, in 2017, 2018. Were you someone who, for nostalgia, did you go back to StarCraft Remastered? Did you try to pick up the Brood War vibes again?
So I did. I practiced it a little bit. I played a tournament in Italy. Just random.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that was a crazy kind of random thing and they had, what's his name? The Polish guy. Polish Protoss player.
Oh, what's his Mana? The Team Liquid one, Mana, right?
No. The Brood War, the guy.
Oh, Draco, the old school one.
Draco.
There you go. Yeah, another one who went to Korea. People don't know, right?
And honestly, Draco. I think Draco and I achieved a similar peak level, maybe, in skill in Brood War. I could see how people thought maybe ranked me higher, but honestly, I think. And maybe I would have kept improving more because he stayed in the pro house longer and maybe he kind of hit his ceiling. I don't know. Anyway, he was there too. And he obviously had just spent a little bit more time practicing Brood War again, gotten closer to our former levels. And so he definitely outplayed me there. But yeah, I played a little bit and got in a little bit of shape. But I'll tell you, I hate having to learn how to place all my buildings for PVZ. I hate that.
Oh, because you have to make the bases in order to block, right?
How to block against, how to just play the game, right? And I'm like, wait, so if I queue a match, and this is another Protoss complaint, this is a Protoss thing, right?
Yeah.
It's a specific Protoss thing. I can't even go queue a match without risking losing to a default MMR Zerg because I don't know if it's a block. So I got to study and practice.
It feels like homework, right? Yeah, I'm going to do my homework before I play a game of StarCraft. I'm with you.
Yeah, a single game, or else I'm going to get embarrassed by a Zergling. So yeah, it's tough. So yeah, I don't. It's a hard game for me to just bounce straight back into,
right?
Because of certain things like that. I wish it wasn't like that, and I probably would play it a little bit more. But even for me, it just feels intimidating. It just feels like a lot of work just to play a satisfying first game. If I could play a friend and we could agree on, they're not going to rush me or something,
right? Like
that
a gentleman's agreement,
fun.
Right?
Yeah, that would be more fun. Of like, hey, look, bro, I don't know how to kill the Hydra. That's another thing. When I started playing, I started going up a few ranks, and then I started encountering the Zergs. That's all they did was like this Hydra all-in timing against my fast expand, and I'm like, I don't remember exactly the build order that I was doing to beat this, and now I got to figure this out. And but that's the game, right? Like if I don't want to figure that out, then why am I playing? Because that's what it is that's what it will constantly be. So yeah, it's tough.
In some ways, I guess, at this point in the interview, you come full circle, right? Because as you said, since you've got a family, you're not trying to go pro in games, but I now imagine, like you say, you play for fun. So the question I have is, the obvious angle a lot of people are taking now is, if they're a big Blizzard fan, they want to play Stormgate or something like that, and everyone's looking for what's the next RTS to give, like, it's not, it has to be as big an esport, just has to give the StarCraft feel, right? What everyone loved about StarCraft, difficult to master, easy to learn, all that jazz. And what do you do? Are you playing Stormgate? Are you looking for games like this that can get the same kind of vibe for you of StarCraft?
Yeah. So Battle Aces has its closed beta that just opened up yesterday, but people can stream it. So there's no NDA, but it's a closed beta. So I was playing that, and I'll stream that some more. I'll probably stream it after this interview, and then Stormgate isn't playable right now, but it will be playable on July 30th. I'm definitely going to play that on July 30th. But Stormgate seems more, well, it's way more like StarCraft than Battle Aces. Battle Aces is definitely gone and kind of made its own RTS. That's very, very different. And so personally, for my taste, without like giving judgment on the games or saying which one I think is better or is going to have more success, Battle Aces is not quite it for me. I could see it periodically coming back and like playing it just for fun here and there, but to like main that game and have that be the game I play for hours every day for a long time, probably not it for me. I like, because they've removed a lot of the macro stuff, and so there's no base building or anything. So it's like I like that stuff, and so ultimately the game that I'm gonna main will have that stuff. And so right now that's Stormgate. But I'm also excited. I think there are more projects in production that'll be coming out in the coming years. So for now, I'm mostly excited about Stormgate, and then we'll see.
I can relate to what you said earlier about when you didn't try other RTS games. You were just like, it's just StarCraft, right? Because that's one thing I can really relate to. Because even though before esports, I was like a massive gamer. I probably played like every, like Japanese RPG for the PlayStation or the Super Nintendo or whatever. I used to play all the games. And back then I used to think I was a gamer as my identity. I have to say, I don't even say I'm a gamer now, because actually it's going to be embarrassing when someone goes, how do you like Elden Ring? It's like, bro, I haven't played a fucking game that wasn't multiplayer for about 20 years. Like, essentially for me, the only games are like StarCraft, Quake, Counter-Strike. Like, I've sort of got like a menu of 4 things to pick from. But in a way, it's why I can relate, because maybe a modern player just plays what's hot or what their friends are playing. But back then, it kind of was part of your identity to play one game and to be really good at one game and actually to invest time into the game. It didn't feel like a waste of time. It felt like, I would actually describe it as like any other pastime, like playing chess or learn the violin or do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's kind of the satisfaction was putting loads of years in, right?
Yeah. Back then, there weren't as many. I mean, when esports exploded in 2010 to 2013 or so. I mean, StarCraft 2 kind of started the explosion, and then the MOBAs really took over, and the shooters were like, hey, we're here too. By the way,
true.
But not that I'm like a historian and all that, but anyway, before, so a lot more game companies were like, we should make a game that could be an esport. That'll make us a lot of money. But before all that, that wasn't really the angle of anyone. And so these games that were like potential esports were few and far between. And so it was like, and you didn't have, if you were in one genre, you didn't have a lot of choices of games. So it was cool how you could tend to stick to one game for a very long time, and that was your identity. We saw it the most at World Cyber Games. I mean, that was the cool thing, because there were so many different games there, and it was like, they're the race car guys, and they're the shooters and all that. So it was like the StarCraft players were we thought we were the best. We were the most legitimate gamers. But yeah, that's definitely, I don't know if that's coming back, because new games are coming out too often now. But hopefully, I mean, God, I never followed Counter-Strike a lot, but it's crazy. Like, someone just like StarCraft could have been a Counter-Strike player so long ago, and still be one now, and that just a constant identity for decades. That's awesome.
I mean, as you say there as well, like the sort of reputation of the players in the different games is very different as well. Like, obviously, Counter-Strike people were a bit more like jocks and like high fives and, hey, I'm going to kill you. The StarCraft ones were considered like the mega nerds who were like, the kid who did his fucking homework and was grinding. It's a bit of a solo pursuit, StarCraft, isn't it?
Yeah, well, and these games were more popular just in the US, I think, and we saw them on MLG a lot. But like the Call of Duty and Halo, Halo and Call of Duty, those were the jocks, and they're playing their little console games. It's like, bro, get a computer.
Dude, that must have been the one when MLG first started. You had StarCraft next to like Call of Duty. I can't even imagine. That's chalk and cheese right there, mate. Like, what a different type of American human that is that plays those games.
Yeah, it was weird. I was actually a very high level Halo player.
Oh, really?
Too.
Okay.
Yeah.
You actually on the side. You played some. Are you on the console? I'm guessing.
On the console,
on PC?
Yeah.
On console?
Yeah, on the console.
Right, okay. Did you ever think about going pro in that game? Because as you said, there was like an MLG, so that was its own game popping at one point.
I did, yeah. At one point, I thought about it, but ultimately, like, I don't think I could ever do a team game.
Right.
I don't want to have a team. I don't want team practices. I don't want I don't want all that. And so it's like I got pretty good, and it was fun. I was playing with pros, like scrimmaging with pros.
Oh, okay.
But I never like put a team together.
Did you actually ever watch like the MLG? Like, did you watch those like Ogre twins or whatever that were like the GOAT players or whatever?
I played with the Ogre
twins.
Oh,
right. Okay.
They were gods. They were really good. I was impressed by the skill level there. Yeah, for sure. Them and I can't remember. I don't have the greatest memory for details, but there were a lot of names I could read and remember and recognize.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah. It was cool. It was a cool scene back then too, because they ended up making an unofficial like online ladder, but there was no official online ladder. You had to network your Xbox with your PC, use a third-party program on your PC to emulate being on a LAN with the other person's Xbox over the internet. That's how you scrimmage online. And
that sounds like a nightmare.
So other than that, you had to play actual LAN because there was no online for Halo 1. Halo 1 specifically. Anyway.
Sure. No, but there's another thing a modern player won't appreciate. In the modern day, every player, just from their bedroom, plays all the other players and the kids in their neighborhood. Back then, because of the internet and lag and, like you say, no matchmaking, so it was the shit to go to a LAN. Like, just going to the LAN was like the social event, right? It was baller.
Yeah. And you don't even, with us, like you played like fighter games on your Super Nintendo with the kids in the neighborhood.
Yes.
And then you go to the other neighborhood and you're like, who's the best in this neighborhood?
Sure.
It was like that. It's like you were in a little pond, and then when you got to go to the ocean, it was crazy to meet with other people and see how good people were. It was pretty weird, and that's all kind of gone now with everything just being online instantly.
Now that you have become the elder statesman, here's the question I have for you. How would you like people to remember you as a StarCraft player? What do you want your legacy to be? What kind of player were you, or who were you?
Question. I want people to remember that I was someone who appreciated how good the Korean players were, and I appreciated their skill, and I thought it was a worthwhile pursuit to become good at StarCraft, even though esports wasn't a known thing. Video games were a waste of time, whatever.
Sure.
And I just thought, hey, what these people who are better than me have achieved is amazing. It's cool. People need to know about this, and I'm going to try my best to achieve it too. And to a certain extent, I did. I was never a world champion. I was certainly not a multi-world champion like other people have been. But you know, if you like watching a game, if you like getting better at a game, that's a worthwhile thing to do. That's who I was. I was a guy who did that, and I got somewhere, and I don't regret it.
Right, this is obviously a very subjective question, NonY, but based, as you say, there was limited opportunity to compete in the West if you weren't a Korean player, basically. Like, there's World Cyber Games, the odd mainly online cups and stuff, you know. So I'm sure there was people in scrims who were amazing. Maybe they never even had a pro career. Who was, for you, who was the best Western player in Brood War you ever played? Who was the person who stood out to you? Who did you think was the best?
Yeah, I don't think I really have a surprise answer. I was always very impressed by Mondragon.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, no one knew how much he practiced.
Yeah. No, it's a mystery, the whole thing about him, yeah.
I felt like there were these, people would say he didn't practice much. And then it was like,
which becomes part of the mystique, doesn't it? It makes it seem cooler in a way, right?
Yeah, and then there were people saying, no, actually, he practices.
Even worse.
And I'm like,
right.
So you don't actually know.
Sure.
So it's like, was he? I don't know, but he did have. I felt like he was good at improvising. I felt like he would do some original things, and he played at a high level, and so I thought that was very cool.
Okay. Right, are you someone was there anyone, because this is like an obvious question to ask, but people never think to do it, because when StarCraft 2 came out, the initial people playing it as pros were all the people who were playing Brood War. Everyone switched over, loads of people joined teams, there was that sort of gold rush early on when there's a lot of names came in that maybe didn't make it. Is there anyone that actually surprised you though, NonY? Someone maybe you played in Brood War and they were nobody, and then in StarCraft 2 they were really good? Is there someone who sort of had a big glow up?
I mean, well, there were people who did, for sure. I mean, like Huck and TLO were not.
Do you remember him from Brood War, Huck? I know he's background playing iccup and stuff.
I think he knew who everyone who knew who I was. I don't think I actually knew who he was in Brood War.
Okay.
Same with TLO. I don't think I really. I might have like come across his name sometimes, but they were both just not at my level, and so they would just be like another name.
Right.
But like, so they both got a lot better. I'm sure there are other examples, but I wouldn't say I was surprised by any of it. It's not. I don't know. I mean, it's hard. It would be an interesting thing to study, but not that anyone ever will. But like, why someone hit the ceiling in Brood War and then was so much better at StarCraft 2. But yeah, I'm glad. I'm happy for such people who found a game where they could express their skill.
At the end of this interview, do you have a final message? Is anyone you'd like to thank or say hello to?
No, not particularly. I mean, I thank my wife for supporting me through all this. I actually been with the same woman I started dating her when I was 16 in high school, and I'm still with her. Right. So she's been the entire way. So she's been amazing. I would thank Victor at Liquid.
Nazgul,
at Nazgul. And because he was, I had a lot of struggles in StarCraft 2, and he was very patient and supportive and did everything he could to help me succeed. And, we never quite got there, but, I couldn't have asked for anything more from him. And, and then, Artosis, I'd have to say Artosis, if it weren't for him, I don't think I would have gone to Korea.
Right.
I think that's almost certainly true. And that was just an incredible experience. And so I have to thank him majorly for that. Other than that, like unironically and not just like so generically, but everybody who just likes StarCraft. I mean, I'm glad there were enough of us who could recognize how great it was and create a community, because without that community, none of this would have been possible either. So thank you, everyone.
Don't you know I'm still standing better than I ever did? And that's in part thanks to my Patreon community, the Skrilluminati. So this video was kindly supported by Frisky, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Ahmed Haju, Jensen Gore, Tobias Bernasconi, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Toucan, Tosh, and you know it if you've ever seen my videos before. If you don't get to know it, because a special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Why not ask a question for my video AMA? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest? Maybe you want to see who the upcoming guests are on my shows, on my interviews. Or do you want to be part of one of those lengthy esports discussions where you set the table of topics? Well, if any of those perks or others catch your fancy, put your money where your mouth is and join the Skrilluminati today, where? Via the Patreon link in the description box.